Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. I am Amber Larkins, your host of Through the Trauma podcast, and today I have with me a very special guest, Miss Erin Copelan. Erin is a storyteller, she's a best-selling author, licensed massage therapist, and now a real estate investor. And Erin has a very interesting story. She was a caregiver for her husband who had cancer. So Erin, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Amber. I'm very excited to be here today.
And I failed to mention that you are a UNOS ambassador as well. So this is, for those of you who don't know, it's organ donation, and she raises awareness about this as well. So very interesting angle that you've taken here, because I know this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. And you saw a need here as your experience and wanted to share your expertise and the things you had learned through this, walking through a very difficult time. So I would love for you to share some of that story with us. And if you want, you can kind of jump right into that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And as a caregiver, so many caregivers don't talk about their experience because the focus is on the patient, and rightfully so, because they're the ones that are sick. But the caregivers are carrying so much and they don't share those experiences, which is exactly why I named my book, Welcome to Caregiving, the things caregivers never talk about. Like I kept it very straightforward, and this is what it is about. Because as a caregiver, I did everything on my own. That's the kind of caregiver I was. I like to call it the desert tortoise. I just describe the different types of caregivers in my book using animals. And the desert tortoise pulls into its shell. If you try to get in there, it'll snap at you, it'll hiss at you. It really stays very protected. And that's the kind of caregiver I was. So support groups and things didn't really speak to me. And I felt very alone through this journey with my husband. And it spanned over a 10-year period of time from when he was diagnosed. He had multiple surgeries, he had a liver transplant. He had very serious complications with a transplant that were very rare, and he almost died. He did not, thank goodness. And today we are celebrating his 7-year transplant anniversary this year, and he is 3 years cancer-free. So it's been a very long,
That's awesome.
long journey. Yeah.
That is it's an incredible story. And I'm just curious, I know that our focus here is caregiving, but did he go through the traditional cancer protocol that, medical professionals will tell us to go through as cancer?
I feel like no. So he was diagnosed with cancer, and the way the story came together, everything that we did was slightly different from the norm. And we were planning a very big vacation. We were going to Africa on safari, which is why he went to the doctor to begin with, because he didn't feel sick. He didn't feel like there was anything wrong. And the labs, his general labs, just came back off. They weren't really right. And we saw a couple specialists, and they said, go on your vacation, come back. We have another specialist when you come back from vacation. Don't worry about it. And when we met with that specialist, they started talking about transplants and cancer and all these things. We said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, didn't they tell you you have cancer? And we were like, no, we're sorry. You are thinking of somebody else. You have the wrong patient. You have the wrong file. This isn't us. And I said, he didn't even have a biopsy, because in my mind, when people talk about cancer, what I knew at that time was there was something wrong, and it had to be biopsied to confirm the existence of cancer. And that was debunked for me. They said, nope, we can tell by the labs. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it is a duck, and he has cancer and he needs a transplant. And it was, yeah. So, and then once he was on the transplant list, he was on the list for about 8 years. And during that time, to prevent the cancer in his liver from spreading mostly within his cancer, it was kind of localized. So he actually had a major resection surgery. So the liver is an awkward shape, but the right lobe of the liver is a little narrower, a little smaller. And they were able to remove that entire right lobe to remove the bulk of the cancer. And so that improved his health and bought him more time
Mhm.
until the transplant.
Mhm. Wow, that's that's very interesting. Because I also have this misconception that cancer is like we have to do a biopsy, we have to check everything. I didn't know that they could just read it through labs, but I guess that
Yeah, at least for liver cancer, my experience is it is very specific with I know a lot of things about liver cancer.
yeah,
Never thought I would know them, but they reside, they take up space rent free in my mind, liver cancer facts. So, yeah.
yeah. But it's something that and this is something that I think a lot of people don't know unless they've walked through cancer. Is like, how does that initial thing come about? And which you just kind of shared with your husband. If you're feeling well, it's hard to kind of know that you have anything wrong. So that must have been quite the experience for you guys, having gone to vacation, come back, and then it's like everyone knows except
And
us. Yeah.
right. Yes, it was very much that feeling. And also, it was that moment that I became a caregiver. So people I don't think they necessarily associate that transformation or the experience of the caregiver until somebody's really sick and they picture a caregiver as somebody like caring for an invalid almost. And it's really, I was in it from that moment and researching and, helping him make decisions and setting up second opinions. And so from that moment, when they said you have cancer, that was the moment I became a caregiver.
Hmm. So tell us a little bit about what kind of impact that had on you guys as a couple. Was that difficult walking through that with him?
It it was parts of it were very easy. We were very much on the same page regarding the kind of care he wanted to receive. Like he wanted to do everything that he could to live. Some people, depending on their stage of life, may not want to go through all the treatments. They may not want to proceed, and maybe their loved one wants them to, and so that can generate some conflict. So for us, we were very much on the same page in that regard. I think most of the relationship recovery was on the back end after the transplant when I really was in that space of he can't do anything and I have to do everything. And so there was the part of me that had to be willing to return responsibility to him. Like, okay, wait a minute. You are capable of doing your own pill box now. You can do that. I did it for him for years. Every Sunday I sat down and organized his pills for him to take. And then it was like, okay, you can do this now. And so me releasing the duties, but him also accepting them back because he will tell you he got a little spoiled during that time. And so returning that balance and also from nurse patient to husband wife, that transition as well. So there definitely is a lot of learning and a lot of growth involved in recouping a relationship that way.
So take us through kind of this journey of what that caregiving experience was like, kind of from start to finish, if you can.
So it's very interesting because I went through all of the motions. I did all the things I had to do that I knew I had to do because when you're a caregiver, it's not like there's a choice about it. You are in this role, you are fulfilling what needs to be done because the person that you love very most in the world, you want them to live. And it was actually 2 years after Jerry's transplant that I started writing my book. that I was going through my healing and I just had all of these thoughts about, what I went through and what it felt like. And I received a calling, just like, you need to put this out there for other people so that other people don't feel as alone as you felt. And that was the beginning of it. And it actually took me about 2 years to write the book. And it was during that process of reliving everything that I was able to step back and say, I was actually living a trauma every single day. So I talked about the pill box, and I knew that those pills were necessary for my husband to stay alive. If he didn't have them, he would reject his organ, he would die. As just as black and white as that. And therefore, because I was responsible for the pills, I felt like if I did them wrong, my husband would die. And so the pill box was a life or death situation for me every Sunday morning for years. I lived that. After his transplant, he contracted graft versus host disease, which is very, very uncommon in solid organ transplants. And instead of rejecting the organ, I describe it as like a reverse rejection. So essentially, the DNA from his organ, from the new organ, tried to take over his body. And in that case, if the organ wins, he dies. And we were in the hospital for about 3 weeks with them trying to figure out what was happening because the condition is so rare. Less than 2% of solid organ transplant recipients get GVHD, and 80% of them die. So I had this information. My husband did not, because he was drugged. They didn't give him those statistics. I knew the statistics. He knew it was not a good situation, but he didn't know, again, the statistics. And so I carried that weight for both of us. And it really wasn't until follow-up appointments after, when he was walking, the surgeon came in, doctors came in, they said, "Oh my gosh, we're so happy to see you. I was calling in from vacation. We thought you were dying." Like, the doctors were that worried. And I remember my husband standing in the exam room, just kind of staring out the window, and he said, "I really almost died, didn't I?" And so he didn't have that awareness until he had recovered. And I had carried that the whole time. And I feel like that's a good example of what caregivers carry inside of them all
Mm-hmm.
of the time through their entire journey.
Yeah, I could
Yeah.
totally see that. That is a heavy burden to carry and that people may not think about. And possibly this could raise some awareness as to like having a little more empathy for people that are carrying those burdens, because that's a heavy thing to carry, especially with your spouse, or if you're a parent carrying that with a
Mhm.
child, having to make those decisions is really tough. So I commend you for that. Do you feel like
Thank you.
do you feel like that burden is still like, do you still carry some of that, or do you carry the weight of it, the residual of it from maybe guilt, or um like maybe it's not fully been released in you having carried something that heavy?
Absolutely. It has improved a great, great deal. Um, for example, I can now sleep through the night comfortably, but sleeping next to my husband, if his breath skipped a beat or paused for a minute, I would bolt awake. The silence would wake me up. And that, I don't know how many years that went on. And so yeah, it has taken several years, but I definitely feel it. And I have experienced some episodes of post-traumatic stress disorder, just returning to the hospital for subsequent procedures. And so I know that the trauma resides in my body. And
Mhm.
so I've been working through, somatic exercises and learning more about those practices to try to complete those cycles of fight or flight so that my body can release them so I don't keep reliving them.
Yeah. How long has it been since your husband has he's cancer free?
3 years. Yeah. So after the transplant, the liver cancer, it actually still floats around in his blood, and he just takes medication to keep it from landing anywhere. But at any time, It's just in his body, and anytime it decides, oh, this is a cozy place to land and grow, it can do that. And so he still does his regular scans. Um, so that cancer had landed, um, let's see, now he's been kind of 5 years ago in one of his adrenal glands, and he had that removed. And then 2 years later, in that same area, there were some residual cells that showed up again on the scan. So he had some more radiation. And so now it's been 3 years that he's been cancer free.
Well, that's a great report.
It's amazing. Yes, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
I think cancer is a very scary thing in general. It runs in my family. I've had grandparents pass from cancer, and it's so unpredictable. That's the thing with cancer. It's just, there's, you don't know. You don't know when it's going to show up. You don't know how fast it's going to progress. It's a really scary thing. Did he get did he have a donor that he got the transplant from?
So at the time, they're doing more living donors now in liver transplant. I don't know that every center does it, but it's becoming a little more common. You see it more in kidneys, where there is somebody that donates a kidney. But in Jerry's case, there was a donor, but it was a deceased donor, and
Mm.
we do not know who that person was. We know it was a young female who was in an accident, and her blood type was the same. The liver was an appropriate size, and so he was able to receive her liver. And we give every year on his transplant anniversary. We celebrate that family and give thanks to them, because with every transplant, there is life is gained, but a life is also lost. And so it is a very difficult thing. And again, it's one of those things people don't talk about. And I will tell you, I didn't think about organ transplants very often until someone said to me, guess what, your husband needs one. But when you can see the good that they can do and the life that they can give, I get very passionate and a little emotional about it, because hits very close to home, obviously.
Yeah, so you being an ambassador for UNOS, talk to us a little bit about that. So now you're kind of an advocate for organ donation.
I am. Yes, I am a firm believer. I think it's a beautiful final gift to be able to offer. Um, an organ donor can save at least 8 lives, just with organs. And then there's benefits with cornea transplants, skin and tissue. They can use bone, they can use muscle and ligaments to help burn victims. And there's just so much um, giving that can be done with organ donation. And so I love being able to answer questions for people, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and just some preconceived notions that may not be true anymore, that maybe they once were and they're not. And so when I get the opportunity to answer questions, I love to do that. And so your audience is always welcome to ask me any questions. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm too old now. You can be any age. You can be any age anymore, and sign up to be an organ donor, because the medical team, they're trained to make those qualifications whether or not the organs are viable and the tissues can be reused. So um, that's a popular one I get.
Yeah, that was my next question. I was going to ask what's a popular question that you get, and that's something I've
Yeah.
never even considered. Is it something that am I too old to give, or if someone gets to a certain level or a certain age, are they too old? It makes perfect sense that they are the ones that you pass away, they look at your organs and they see if they're viable or not. So it's not really for us to decide. Organ donation is a beautiful thing because you have the opportunity to live on even past, if your body cannot live any longer, then for you to be able to give an organ, it is a beautiful thing, to someone who could lose their life if they don't get that one organ. And I know I had a friend that was, I don't remember what organ it was. He was on the list for like 8 years for an organ. And it's very scary for someone who needs an organ.
It has just a beautiful ripple effect, because yes, my husband is still alive and he gets to continue his life, but I have my husband,
Mhm.
and his son has his father. And all of the people that love him still get to get Jerry in their lives. So
Mhm.
it's more widespread than saving one individual life.
Talk to us a little bit about like the experiences that you had. Did you have any experiences with the medical staff? How was that? Because I know walking through that can just be tough. Getting information and being able to make decisions and educated decisions. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
The transplant team we had here in Florida, where Jerry had his transplant, they were phenomenal. They were very easy to access. There was a floor at the hospital for transplant patients, and like the nurse to patient ratio was excellent. So when he had his transplant, I actually felt comfortable enough at night. I was with him all day. And then when the night nurse came on duty, I would check in with her, we'd go over everything, and then I would actually go home and sleep. So I would sleep at home, and then I would get up at 5 in the morning. I'd get the Starbucks drive through to get some coffee because that's the only way I could stay awake. And I was at the hospital before 7 a.m. for rounds again. Um, but I felt solid enough in that care that I felt okay going home to sleep. Other hospitals, because we lived in 3 different states during this process, we moved a couple times. So I worked with other medical centers in different states. And some of those, I did not leave him like for a second. I might run out and get food and come back, but I slept there and I was with him all of the time because I felt like um, my attention, he needed the extra care from my attention. There was one medical center when we went to get our second opinion. We were living in Los Angeles at the time, and I didn't know anything about cancer. They had told us you need a transplant, you have cancer, and I feel like that was it. They may have given more information, but I didn't remember it because we were so caught off guard. And when we went for a second opinion, I was super organized. Like I had questions and I had them typed out and I left spaces so I could write in the answers, and I had a folder and it had a label. Like I was so prepared. And we sat in front of the surgeon and I asked my first question, and I will never forget the question because it was the only one I asked. And I said, "Is Jerry's cancer primary or secondary?" And he sat back and he rolled his eyes and he said, "Oh, you're one of those." And I stopped talking. And there was a little bit more to our conversation with him. And when Jerry and I walked out to the car, because I didn't say a word because I really wanted Jerry's decisions about his care to be his. I wanted to support him. And he said, "Well, we're not going there for a transplant because I'm not going anywhere where they talk to my wife like that." And so I definitely got to experience exceptional care and really, really terrible, worst kind of care I feel like a caregiver and patient can experience.
Mhm. That's such a shame. I mean, really, that someone would make you feel that way, that you are not entitled to know. And I feel like if somebody comes in and they want to know and they're educated on it, educate them. But I feel like this is a problem in the medical industry as well, because some, not all, they just want to go by a complete protocol, and they don't want to empower you with the decisions or the information, the education that you need to make informed decisions. And it's really a shame because it should not be that way. So I know you do some coaching. You help people kind of through this caregiving process. Is this something that you do talk with people about when they have these issues?
I will. I will honestly talk about every single part of it. Like I try to really be an open book. Some parts are easier than others for me because I am talking about traumas. So part of them, when I talk about some things, it will reignite some things in me. But I try to be as open as I possibly can. Both in my book, I was very open. I created an organizational tool for caregivers and patients to help them be open with one another, to help them communicate better with medical professionals so that they can go into these situations and feel confident and feel like they have a voice and not feel like they're stumbling and trying to figure things out. and they have a place to write things down because I get my white coat syndrome, and doctor can tell me all the things in the room, and the minute I get to the parking lot, I have forgotten every single thing they said.
Yeah.
And so I
You're not
went from
alone.
writing like on the backs of receipts and trying to figure it out to creating a binder system to help with that organization so that when you get home, you remember what the doctor said. You can sit, caregiver and patient can sit together and they can talk about it and make decisions.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about this thing you've created. So you have books that you've written that talks about the caregiving experience, but then you've also created this, is it a journal or it's a notebook that
It is actually a binder. I did put it in a binder. It's called the Patient Handbook. And I put it in a binder system because I know not everybody's brain works exactly like mine. So I know what basic tools are needed, but I know you might need it in a different order.
Mhm.
So I have it set up in a binder and I created dividers because I like it to be organized. I have a printed out calendar because sometimes our phones are amazing, technology is amazing. Wi Fi doesn't work everywhere. I've been in the hospital in weird sections, can't get a signal, so I can't plug that appointment into the computer. And it's also really handy, especially when you're in the middle of acute major medical, to be able to write down on the calendar when you were admitted to the hospital, what they did on what day, what doctor you saw, and you have it spread on a calendar in front of you. It helps with the medical billing. It helps when you're communicating with specialists, all of that. I created the body scan checklist, which has a list of pain points for the patient to kind of go through before they meet with the doctor. And it has a human silhouette too, so they can, if they have a hard time visually scanning their own body internally, they have another visual guide. And then that helps them generate questions like, you know what? I do have this pain in my gut like every morning when I wake up. Maybe I should ask the doctor about that. And then there's a space to write those questions. There's a space to write down what the doctor says about it. And then I left spaces for gratitude. Every one of my appointment notes pages has a space for gratitude so that we can stay in tune with what's going right, because it's really easy to get into the cycle of all the things that are happening that feel bad.
Mhm.
And then the last section is the love notes section. And those are just blank pages. And I call them love notes because they can either be for patient and caregiver to leave notes for one another, or if you have multiple caregivers, maybe siblings are caring for a parent, and they take turns taking them to the doctor, they can leave notes to each other in there. And I also used it to write down things like where I parked the car. Because sometimes you go to these big medical centers and these multi-story garages. I can't tell you how many times I lost my car as a caregiver. And again, phone is super handy now. Back when I first started this, 10, 12 years ago, the BlackBerry did not have the camera and the functions and the things that we have access to now. But sometimes that pen and paper is just where it needs to be.
Mhm. And how many people have you helped through this process to date, or do you even know?
I don't know specifically. I mean, I get a lot of messages from people who have read the book and used the patient handbook. I've got people who are dealing with chronic pain and issues that message me that go, oh my gosh, this handbook has been like a lifesaver for me trying to meet with specialists and figure out what my chronic pain is all about. I have caregivers who read my book and said, I haven't been to the doctor myself in 5 years, and I just made a doctor's appointment. And that really touched me. I've had caregivers that have read the book that are on the other side of caregiving, and they're not doing it now, but they said, oh my gosh, this is exactly what it was like. And I really wish I had this when I was a caregiver. And so it's touched so many different points of caregiving in all of the different phases. It excites me. It makes me happy that it's had that kind of, it's touched so
Impact.
many people that way. Yeah, impact.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. um, so you have this product. This is an amazing thing, by the way. And you have helped numerous people through this process. What is your vision for the future with this? Do you hope are you, do you coach people through it, or do you just have the book in the binder?
I just have the book in the binder right now. I have started building. Right now I'm in my mind I'm saying course, but I don't know if it's a more intimate group, if it's a more evergreen thing, but I have different modules and platforms that I really want to speak on and just get that information out there to help support people. But I definitely want, broader reach and more tools for people. On my website, I've created, a bunch of free, just like PDF downloads. I have 10 ways to support a caregiver. So if you know a caregiver and you don't know how to support them, just 10 little things that you can do for them just to help
Mm,
support these folks. I have 5 myths about organ donation. I have 5 ways to celebrate without cake or champagne. So there's just all different ways in trying to create content to help support the community in digestible pieces, because when you're a caregiver and living these traumas, it is not the time for big mindset changes and lifestyle changes, because you're in it, up to your eyebrows in other duties as assigned, because you're living your life and working and bathing yourself and grocery shopping and taking care of the kids and all the things. And now you have all of these other responsibilities that you've had to take on. So I try to create bite-size support tools to help people feel understood and help them get through these periods of trauma.
yeah. What you're doing is really amazing, and I've never heard of anything like this. I know that, there's some resources in hospital environments, but nothing to this extreme. So, I mean, the things that you're doing is truly remarkable, and I know appreciated among people that are going through it, because this is not something that we think about on a regular basis. And I think until you've actually walked the walk, it's really hard to fully put into words the things that you're going to experience. It reminds me of when I had my babies, when I was pregnant. There's like, once you experience pregnancy, it's like there's all these things people never talked about, but you experience all these things, they're still there. Having someone that's walked through that journey, being able to hold your hand and say, these are the things you can expect, and these are the resources that I have for you, is super impactful. And I'm sure it's making an impact in many, many people's lives. So I do want you to touch a little bit on now you guys are, through this to the extent of, I mean, he's cancer free. You
Yeah.
are not in and out of hospitals like you were. So, what is life like now? I know we've touched on this a little bit as far as you carry some of that trauma with you and you're working through that. But aside from that, like, is he able to do the things that he used to do? Does life go back to being somewhat normal now that you guys have overcome this?
For the most part, it really has. He works. He can work out. He takes out the trash, and he does things to drive me nutty, like any husband can drive a wife nutty. So yeah, absolutely. And as a caregiver, there's, especially when you're caring for somebody possibly in the end stages of their life, there's that feeling that you cannot leave them, that you really need to be by their side all of the time. And I experienced a portion of that in the uncertain times. And, but now I'm also free to do my things, and my husband is free to do his things. And so, yes, we do have that freedom back.
So you've taken something that has been very traumatic, very hard to deal with, and you've turned it into a very useful tool for other people. And this is the true representation of taking pain and turning it into purpose, or taking trauma and turning it into triumph. It's amazing what you've done. Let me ask you this. So, if you had advice to maybe give to someone who maybe they're just starting this journey of being a caregiver, whether that be to a spouse or a child or a parent or even a sibling or someone else, just in general, what what would be your best advice to give them?
So I don't care for the term self-care. It is not my favorite term because I feel like it has taken on almost a frivolous meaning. And sometimes for me, people would say, "Oh, are you taking care of you?" And I would take that in a very bad way because it felt like another thing I had to do. And so I like to talk to people and caregivers about taking the pause and pausing because we always have to go back to caregiving. It's not going to stop, it's not going to go away. We have to do the things we have to do. You don't always have an hour to go to the spa or get your hair done or big things, but maybe you do have 5 minutes when you take a shower to enjoy the smell of your body wash. And so to pause and make that extra, maybe couple dollars in the body wash scent that makes you happy and bring yourself into that awareness. Taking those minutes when you get to run to the grocery store and maybe listening to your favorite song in the parking lot before you go in. And so really capturing that awareness and that presence and taking those small pauses and then acknowledging that you've done that for yourself and being able to celebrate those little things, the little things. Like maybe your patient filled their own pill box. You get to celebrate that. They can take the trash out again. You get to celebrate that. And so, but it's the small things. It's pausing for the small things.
And that's so beautiful. And I really love that because it's so easy to get caught up in negative, and this is across the board. This goes not only for caregivers, but across the board. It's so easy to get caught up in these negative things. And life is, I mean, it is a journey. It's a walk. It's not like everything is going to be easy. We're going to have to walk up hills sometimes. But um, finding that gratitude is so important. And I've had guests on here before, and I will ask them, like, what do you think is the biggest, most impactful thing someone can do? And it comes back to gratitude. And I've seen it in my own life, and I can hear it all throughout your story here of how you've used gratitude to kind of get through this. And if you look at Erin, like my listeners that are watching them on video, look at you and they can say this is a woman who is strong and she's powerful, she's empowering because she's done these things, and it's not been an easy journey. But how did she get through it? I guarantee you gratitude is high up on the list.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And some of the parts are ugly, and I talk about that in my book because caregivers get those quote bad feelings of grief and anger and frustration, and those are things that they don't talk about. And so then when you feel them, it feels abnormal and you feel like maybe you're doing something wrong if you're angry and frustrated, and you're not.
mm.
They're all very human emotions, and being able to move through them and process them and know that however you're feeling is okay. It's okay.
do you go through therapy now? Are you in therapy to kind of
I
overcome
am.
some of the grief? Yeah.
I am. Absolutely.
This is another thing as well. I really encourage people because I believe every person needs therapy. We all have traumatic things that we've dealt with, we've gone through, and we all have to get that off of our chest because it's going to manifest in an ugly way. The best advice you would have, Erin, would be what? Gratitude. Get therapy, get in therapy, release some of that.
Yep. Gratitude,
What else?
giving yourself appreciation for what you are doing, like celebrate yourself
Yeah.
for any little thing. Give yourself, like, be thankful for yourself and celebrate yourself. The therapy, absolutely. There's therapists that specialize in caregiving. And the only other thing to say about that is it's a very personal thing. I have been through a lot of therapists. And so if you go once and you don't make a connection, it can take a little bit of time. And so if you can hold a little grace, so grace, offering yourself a little grace, that's the other top thing. Gratitude, therapy, grace. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I know we're going to put all of your things in the show notes. We'll definitely give like resources and things that you have, your binder and your books, and then your website, of course, that will lead people if you decide to do a course or whatever is in the future. But if you had other takeaways that you could give people, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
There are more resources that are popping up a little bit. If you are looking at one of my favorite alternative therapies is EFT or tapping. Brad Yates, I believe, is the proper way to pronounce his name, and he has some great tapping techniques on there, and I find it just to be a lovely way to get into yourself and just get centered and work through some of the emotions that you're feeling. And it's quick. You do it quick. You can do it in a bathroom stall in a hospital, in the car, in the parking lot, like wherever you are. It doesn't have to be a big production. So I like tapping.
I've never tried it myself, but I've heard great reviews from it. So definitely research that if you're looking for a trauma type therapy, because I've heard great things about it. Well, Erin, is there any final remarks or anything you would like to kind of leave our audience with?
I think just really going back to that, taking the pause and celebrating the little things that you do for yourself. I feel like I mentioned, self-care sometimes is made to feel really big, and then it has to be something really profound. And we forget about what we're already doing for ourselves. And you're doing so much for your loved one. And you get to give yourself credit for that, but also any little thing that you are doing for yourself. So that appreciation. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your expertise in this. I know that this raises a lot of awareness for those of us who've never had to walk that journey, but may possibly in the future. So I thank you so much for that. And just thanks for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I'm very excited to have the episode air and connect with your guests. So I hope it's been a helpful message.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.